people here? Can everyone see us? Can they hear us?
There are so many questions.
There's the
Hey, there we are. And we look great.
I'm hearing the. Can you mute it or something? I'm hearing what's being recorded played back.
I can't hear anything that's being
I
recorded.
can't either.
But yeah, we're good to start, Cole, if you
Oh,
want
you
to
know
jump
what
in.
it is? I think I just have. I think I have my. It's just open in the background somewhere. Let me just mute it. It's me. I'm the
It's
issue.
you. All right. So, like, we're all good?
All good?
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Well, thank you everyone who's joined in. We'll give a few more minutes for people to hop in here. We do have the chat open, so if you have any questions for us or for Mysticky, you can drop them in the chat here. Um, but otherwise, yeah, we'll just give another minute or so to let people get in. Let us know if you can hear us okay, see us okay, uh, all that good stuff.
I
I
think
can
it
hear you
must have been
great, Cole.
working because that's what I was hearing was I forgot I had the window open in the
Yeah,
background.
I can
I
turn it up
think
here.
so. I think it was all working.
Sweet.
I guess mine's connected to my headphones, so I wouldn't be able to hear it. But
All right, fantastic. Well, uh, thank you everyone for hopping in. Thank you, Mysticky, for joining us. Mysticky, yeah, we want to turn it
Yeah.
over to you. So maybe introduce yourself. Tell us who you are. Tell us about yourself, and
Okay.
we'll get
Go from
going.
there a little bit, right? Okay. Bonjour, everyone. My name is Mystiki LaPlante, Mystiki Niskan, which means younger brother of the mountains in Blackfeet or Pekani. I am an Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Pekani, Filipino board game designer located out of the Twin Cities. Yeah, very excited to be here. Very excited to be working with Kinson Key Games on the board game Manomen, the food that grows on water. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means wild rice. To tell you a little bit about myself, as a day job, I work in banking and treasury management services, which just basically helps money get from one place to another place, from A to B, and work very effectively with all of our clients. And maybe the systems that I think about all day long and connections help me design a little bit better in my board game for here too.
Cool. When did you start designing games? Was it something you did as a child or something that you started later on in life?
So it's kind of funny that you say that. So I grew up with so many brothers and sisters. I have 5 brothers and sisters. So I would say that when I was growing up, I didn't think about this a lot before this question or anything else, but I probably made a lot of games when I was younger. Pencil, paper. I'm the middle child, so like I was always kind of trying to connect all of us, and like I have older siblings, younger siblings, and like how can I play with all of you guys together? Maybe made some card games. I definitely know I made a ton of like toy sets and stuff, like tops out of Lego, so we could like battle them back in the day, or like all these others. But when it came down to like board games, I really don't think I started that journey until about, I'd really have to say 3 years ago. My baby's 4, so my daughter's 4 now. I started about when she was about a year old. Um, and since that journey, I started really just diving into the board game world, trying to figure out what it is, everything else like that. Making games. My first game design was a 4X board game, so it was like very large. It taught me a lot about all the little intricacies of how mechanics really function because once you make one little tweak in that one, a million other things kind of change. And that's kind of how I started. So about 3 years ago, I started working on Convergent.
when I played of yours was the 4X
Yeah.
space game.
Yeah, I figure we'll probably get around to that story eventually of
Yeah.
seeing Manomen on the table and saying to ourselves like, "Ooh, that game looked cool," and us being like, "Hey, can we see your game?" And you're like, "Yeah, here's my 4X game," and we're like, "Hey, "This is great.
Right.
Where's that other game at though?"
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. That definitely touched base on all of that stuff. Yeah. I that was the where Dennis and I first met playing that 4X game, and then you guys played that one of mine the first time too. So
Mm.
I'm happy you guys all played it. It's gone through so many iterations and
Yeah, it
changes,
was
but
a very cool game. Now, like in the last 3 years that you dove kind of deep into kind
mm,
of hobby board games, like have you had any favorites along the way? Like any favorite games that you really enjoyed,
of my own personal, like that I
or
played,
just yeah,
professional,
just any
anything.
games you've played? Yeah.
Um, so to talk about that a little bit, like I didn't I've been playing a lot of board games primarily over the last 3 years, right? And so to Dennis's point, early in my journey, I had played a lot of prototypes right away, so I didn't really get into the game design world and like through like, oh, I'm a huge hobby board game player.
Mm.
I maybe played like Catan and definitely all the Monopoly, definitely all the Sorry and everything else like that. Um, and then we had one friend who kind of started introducing us to the hobby board game world, but it was started out actually primarily as Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm.
So like I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, ended up starting to DM myself, wrote a 300-page world, and then I was like, okay, this is fun, but like, where are these other aspects of things? So I started developing board games and whatnot. And in that journey, I think right away I was introduced to Galactic Cruise and a couple other games that have since come out on Kickstarter, and I've really enjoyed that. But once I started playtesting myself and playing other polished and professional games, I really enjoyed um, mechanics of things like Cascadia. I really enjoy the hand management in Brass. I really enjoy the way that like event cards and everything else come out in Spirit Island and the intricacies of the asymmetry of that, right? And so a lot of the games that I've like been studying and like really learning about are the ones that are a little bit more medium weight to heavy because that's what I really enjoy as my playing myself.
Mm.
And so even like the solo play of like Darwin's Journey and stuff like that have been really, really fun for myself.
Nice. Yeah, Spirit
Yeah.
Island, especially, is one that Colton has talked a lot about, but it's
Mhm.
one I've yet to play, and it's really high on my list to want to try it. Yeah.
Yeah. What Spirit Island's such a cool like crunchy game, um, because like and as a solo player, because I primarily play games solo, I'll
Mhm.
play it two and three handed, and it'll take
Yeah.
me like hours. So I've not busted it out in a while because like I have to
Yeah.
do three completely different lines of thinking as I'm playing it, but oh, it's so fun.
Yeah, I
That's
feel
so
like
fun.
It's so
that's a
fun.
game that you don't worry so much about the alpha gamer because it's like I have enough to worry about just looking at my cards, let alone what to do with your cards. Like, you know,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
The only time I really experienced like some level of alpha game in that game was the first time I played Spirit Island because like at that point everybody's learning and it's kind of like
Mm.
we don't most of us don't know what we're doing yet, so why like we need your help. You're teaching us the
Mm.
game, please help lead us through how we can optimize taking care of the Dahan. I love that one because it does have also the indigenous element of like let's take away decolonization and everything else like that, so
Oh
that
yeah,
was kind of
I love that.
fun to me.
Mm.
So you said that you kind of jumped into this whole
Mm.
hobby game design world about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So where along that timeline did you start working on Manomen? So how long have you been working on it?
So I started working on Manomen. Realistically, you guys, I started working on Manomen about a year ago. The physical prototype, my first physical prototype of that was back in March. But the conception of the project started probably before that. But I remember that Dennis and I had connected at Protospiel, Minnesota, right? And so the year before as well, that's where Dennis and I had kind of talked, and we'd been talking several times throughout the years at Protospiels. Because he sat down with me first right away
Hmm.
and was like, "Hey, here's everything. Let me teach you what Protospiel is." And I'm very, very grateful for that experience. But and we can talk more on that in a little bit. But in regards to where Manomen started, it started as an idea because at that proto spiel, I was really thinking about like what makes a good game, right? And the entire year before that, I had been spending time going around to different playtesting events, different conventions to kind of see what attracted me to board games, but not only me, but like sit back as a bystander and kind of watch what people were talking about and people were like enjoying as play. And so at that proto spiel, I was just kind of talking to everybody about like theme, right? And how like important theme is. And it's not just like any theme, because realistically, you can slap a theme on basically any solid set of mechanics that work as a game and it'll be there. But like theme from like a narrative perspective and like a storytelling perspective. And when I was talking to Dennis, like we were just admiring some of the games we'd play tested together, and we were talking on theme, and we were talking about the storytelling elements of some of the games that we love, right? Like Spirit Island is an example of like your spirits trying to protect the island of Dahan, and you're able to really get into the narrative of that, right? Um, Companies and ownership and brass, like the thoughts of behind that really is what's inspired me with Manomen. But when I started thinking about like narrative and theme, I was like struggling personally with trying to figure out how to bridge uh, a narrative that like just in general, right? I was like, oh, I can think of really cool, fun ideas, but how do I myself get attached to those ideas enough to really work on a project for as long as it's going to take to bring a game like Manomen or anything else to full development? And so I was like, why not start out with something that's really like tightly related to myself in Manomen and in my culture. And that's when I was like, when I started thinking about my culture, thinking about me, thinking about the narrative of who I am and all the intersectionality that is like a part of myself. Um, the teachings of my elders really came out in Manomen. And so when I actually sat down to create it, I think I'd only thought about Manomen maybe for like 2 weeks. And basically what was 80% of the game that you guys had seen was created in like a week. Because and that's not to say like I haven't been wasn't like doing a ton of stuff in that before, because if you think about this, I was like 2 years before that I had really been working on trying to understand mechanics and everything else like that. But like it was a kind of a perfect marriage of like here's all the elements that I've been working on up into this point to really develop my skill set, and let's put them all in a really tight game, a really fun game that has a theme that really matches. And like that once that happened, I just hit the ground running and I started working really really hard, play testing it like every week I could, bringing in all the spiritual, cultural elements and uh, ethical elements that I could into the game to really build up how powerful it is, for the theme that I know the theme and narrative of that is the topic. So yeah, it started about a year ago, developed it really really hard over the last year, and then before you guys signed it, and then yeah.
That's great.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think that's, a really good theme, and that's obviously what drew us to it. So it's great to hear, what inspired you with the theme and everything. I think most game designers, so we all have a goal of, making something that's fun for people to play or something that's really engaging for the players. But is there
Yeah.
anything else besides that you would want a player to experience or to take away after playing the game?
I think so. When I think about Manomen, I think about like what Manomen means to the Anishinaabe culture, right? And Anishinaabe Ojibwe culture all around the United States, and where like the people. Um, Manomen is a medicine. It is a sacred food that our people relish and cherish and gift to one another to show one another respect. Um, my biggest hope for Manomen when I built it, besides build a fun, really fun game, was to kind of start to bridge something that I love in my culture with something that I love in my hobby. And so the takeaways that I really want people to understand from it is how, like, some of those lessons. I want people to see that when you're playing the game, the mechanics facilitate reciprocity, they facilitate respect, they facilitate learning from your elders and providing to your community to not just benefit for yourself, but to benefit for other people and people that you're working with right away. And so you guys are working really hard to like take a lot of the elements that we built into the game to really facilitate that and make it so that that's going to be a huge part of it. Um, I grew up quite traditional in the sense of like I went to sweat, participated in Native American ceremonies and going to different events and stuff like that. So I grew up in a very different way than what the more modern Americans grow up in. And it's just been really meaningful to me to try to incorporate all of those positive things and beautiful things from my culture into the game and mechanics. And I just want people to feel that. I want it to feel that when they pick up like an elder card that they add to their hand, that they learned a little bit more from a teaching that they had gotten from one of the elders. I
Mm.
want them to feel like when they build a tool, they're helping themselves, but like now when they see somebody else use that tool to help process the wild rice, process the medicine of Manomen, that they're feeling good for that. Not because they like, because they might not be able to use that item or tool or anything else like that, but like they feel good, like, oh yeah, that you're using the thing that I built, and now I feel empathy and sympathy and everything else with you because you're using something that I created. And a lot of that reciprocity of like, I'm going to take a little bit, but then now I'm going to give back is such an important lesson for me as a middle child who have younger siblings that I want to give to, but then also as somebody within my community that wants to continue to help educate people about Native American Ojibwe culture as much as I can.
Yeah, that's great. And that's kind of what we loved most about it, right? Was just how thematic and true to the culture we can be with the mechanics. Because even in the initial design that you had, utilized a lot of those really cool elements. I know we've touched on it a few times. You mentioned like tools and processing, but maybe you want to spend just a second kind of talking about the process of kind of harvesting and processing Manoomin and what those steps look like and the tools that are used. So maybe people who aren't familiar
Yeah.
with the process could kind of understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. So Manomen, the game had been built at the origin of 5 basic steps of harvesting Manomen, right? Like that's what I broken down the game to being. And you can dissect those a little bit further as you guys want to, anybody who wants to participate in doing research. But the process of harvesting Manomen or wild rice consists of going out in a canoe and having essentially normally like 2 individuals or more, depending on whoever fits in the canoe. You have a pusher, you have somebody who is using knocking sticks to bring wild rice into the canoe to collect it as you move along a bed of water. Wild ricing is a very gentle process with the land because like there's so many conditions that need to be met in order for wild rice to actually grow healthy and grow grow in its plentitude that it can, such as like how deep the water is, to how warm the water is, to all of these other processes. And so when you go out into like to just touch base on the 5 steps, it's going to be collecting Manomen on the water through a canoe using knocking sticks and the push to pull. Then you are going to bring the wild rice back to the land to dry it on drying mats in the sun, and oftentimes just let it sit out for a while to dry out from being on the water. You are then going to be parch it to allow for it to dry out hard, like more intensely. And parching it means that you're going to be bringing it closer to a fire, oftentimes to allow for that water that's deeper within inside that medicine to come out and to be able to be preserved a little bit later. And so um, there's fire that's involved with as one of the tools. We have a drying mat that's involved as one of the tools. The next step is going to be the dancing the wild rice. And so what that consists of is people putting on moccasins to be able to step on the rice, because on the exterior of Manomen is a hard hole that needs to be broken down a little bit to actually be able to be like remove the dark grain wild rice inside of that piece to be able to be consumed and preserved later. And then the last step consists of winnowing, which is having wild rice in a basket, in a winnowing basket, and tossing it into the air to allow for that hole that you just broken up while dancing the rice to be able to like moved into the air and get removed. And then once you go through all of those processes, again and again and again, wild rice becomes ready to be preserved, either to be consumed right away or to be held through wintertime or any of those other activities to be gifted to other people to kind of go on. So Manomen's built around those 5 steps. So again, it's collecting from the water, drying it, parching it, dancing the wild rice, winnowing it, and essentially storing it after that as well. And so we really built around those processes. In the game, we've included, like we said, 5 tools as well. the tools are going to be canoe, like upgrading your guys' canoe, like we have, right? I think it's still in there. We have the drying mat, which is actually like a leather mat or anything else like that. We have the fire, building up fire and having the resources allowed to do that. We have moccasins that can be made into the game, and then we have the winnowing basket. And so those were some of the things that I had designed into the game to make it so that players can do basically two different things: build actual tools that can be used, and then 5 steps to actually processing the wild rice.
Yep, that's great.
Yeah, so like we talked about before, we played this game for the first time at Proto ATL in Atlanta last year. um, we loved it. The three of us talked about it so often. Anytime we would see you at a convention, you were like playing it, and we saw like another publisher at your table, we'd get like a little nervous. Oh, I hope they love it, but maybe not as much as we do. And then we eventually signed the game. And in signing it, um, we kind of took it under our wing, keeping you in the loop, of course. But we have kind of taken maybe the front seat on development. So, what is it like from the maybe like your point of view, the designer point of view, especially of a game with this theme, with this kind of cultural interconnectedness? Kind of what is
Yeah.
it like to have a project that's near and dear to you, not just as a project, but as a part of your like life? Kind of what is it like to kind of hand that over gently? What's that been like for you?
Um, to be 100% honest, it's been quite emotional in a both high and lows, right, at different times. And that's not to say that I'm not grateful, incredibly, incredibly grateful for the journey and everything else like that. But to just talk on that, it's kind of been an interesting thing because, like we were talking about earlier, Manomen and the culture is so, this is a sacred thing, right? Like Manomen is a sacred item to our Ojibwe Anishinaabe culture. And when building this, I had so much in my mind always of, hey, one day you will be passing this on to a publisher. And when you do, what is that going to look like? And so I had essentially prepared myself again and again and again to understand that in order for me and the people to do this project right, they have to be very willing and open to trying to understand the culture and the importance and the sacredness of this particular food and process, um, in that journey of publishing it. And so while I was going through and getting everything like signed with you guys, like I understood that I would be taking a step back, right? But in taking that step back, there were contingencies that we'd placed in person and in that contract that made sure that we were going to be protecting the sanctity and the sacredness of Wildweiss and Manomen. And you guys had worked with me very well in that contract process to make it so that I could still be very much so involved with the whole direction of the game, right? From talking to you guys about mechanics that you guys are going to be changing, being able to be the one of the individuals that can connect us with the appropriate people to be doing art and cultural consultation and like language specialty, right? Like that is something that like when we'd signed that contract and we'd been looking at like this game as a product, it was important for me to make sure that everything was centered in that. And the fact that I was able to work with you guys in negotiation of the contract still now, right, with who we're talking with within the Ojibwe and Native American communities to participate in helping us with art and language and everything else. Um, it's felt good, and then it's also felt sad, right? Because it's like, oh, I want to keep doing this as much as I do it because I love it, but I also have a day job, and you guys are absolutely wonderful designers and everything else like that. So from that perspective of you guys as men, you guys as designers and people that have put out such an amazing product in Galactic Cruise, which I've played multiple times, um, I was super excited. I was emotional about the fact of transitioning the rights and direction of everything over. But I'm grateful, and I honestly couldn't be more excited about the team that is managing this, right? Um, I know what you guys do with your work. I know I've played games now with you guys multiple times and know how much you guys think about the game, how much you guys like actually put into all of the mechanics and the elements, how you guys have asked me questions about whether or not the direction that you guys are going to go with this, if it fits well enough with the culture. And the fact that you guys are so open with allowing for this game to really be a part representation of the culture in the light that it needs to be. And I'm very grateful for that portion of everything.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously, this is a very important theme and topic for you overall. And I know that you've got a few other games you're working on that are very different. They're going in other directions.
Yeah.
But do you see yourself returning? Like, do you want to make other games on other aspects of Ojibwe culture or your your past history?
Yeah, I think so for sure. I think when it like if we talked I briefly mentioned it. Intersectionality, right? And like that narrative, right? And how we who we are as people and what makes us who we are. And being Anishinaabe, being Native American is a huge portion of who I am. Being Pakani and Blackfeet is a huge portion of who I am. And if I could do anything to help educate people around the world through the hobby that I love in board game design, I would absolutely love to do that. And even if it's not like necessarily my own Native American culture, but maybe there's another designer out there that wants to work with me on how I've done this to maybe bring something, an element of their own culture into board game design world, I would love to help do that because what we need right now as Native Americans are so underrepresented in media. We're so underrepresented all over in basically every related demographic and research that there is out in the world. And to allow for our voices to be heard, I would love to continue to do work on projects that are Ojibwe related, that are Blackfeet related, that are Filipino related, but like primarily within the Native American culture. Do I immediately know what those projects look like right now? No, but I would be very much so okay with continuing to explore other elements of that because what the journey's been allowed for me to do is allowed for me to really participate in who I am a bit more by diving deeper into the culture in a way. We live in such a fast-paced American society, right? That is so commercially centric now at this point that like we don't always get to explore those elements of ourselves, and a lot of Native American peoples don't always get to explore the elements of themselves of like, oh, I am Ojibwe, but there's a big difference, not exactly a big difference because we are all related, but there's sometimes a difference between the way that the Native American Ojibwe people are in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan versus the way that they are in up in Canada versus the way that they are over all around the Midwest here. And so exploring parts of those cultures have really allowed for me and the differences of those to really see who I am, see who my grandparents were, see who my relatives were and are. And I'd love to bring that out in another game. But yeah, I know exactly what that is right now? No. But I think that if I can continue to use the platform that I'm building as my own personal brand, but then also as like a brand with you guys or anything else, I'd love to explore those options because I think that that would be a really powerful way to help educate people, right? Bridging fun with learning, I think, is one of the most powerful tools that you guys like we all have and everybody has available to them. Um, and that would be something that I'd love to continue to explore, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. One thing you mentioned a minute ago that I'd love to kind of go back to is you talked about like cultural consultants, language experts. So it's like how do you
Mhm.
kind of what's your vision for wanting to include some of those elements and those people that are within the Ojibwe community to help with Manomen?
Yeah. So I think the vision from the start has always been to work with Native American artists. We talked about that. And so anywhere from the individuals that are going to could be doing art on the cards, right? Um, woodland art is such a attachment to Ojibwe cultures as well as just like art in general. Anytime I go to a fair here around the Midwest that has Native Americans, there's so many people that are participating in beautiful, beautiful art. Um, and I'd love to have those incorporated on cards or incorporated in like a booklet that explains maybe a little bit about the Ojibwe communities that are around the Midwest and that participate in harvesting wild rice. And then maybe even just like take a slight step back from that and help educate people that might be able to help understand different programs or even just touch base on some programs that could be really helpful to the preservation of the Native American Ojibwe culture. And you guys, we talked about potentially adding a lot of those elements into the game to as like an option to help facilitate that learning, facilitate that preservation of culture. When we talked on language specialists, right? We've connected already with different organizations around the Midwest. There's so many initiatives to help preserve Ojibwe and Native American languages. And as we've done our research and we've done our connections of reaching out to some of those people, um, my hope is that we would have Native American words that have the phonetic pronunciation or different stories that are included in the book that really kind of tell the story of wild rice, tell the legend of wild rice. And as we get the contracts in place to make sure that we're doing that appropriately with the right voices, with the right individuals, maybe professors or different storytellers that are recognized for their stories and their validity to everything, that's would be really meaningful to us in the project because it's important for us to make sure that when we're addressing Native American culture, that we're doing it from a place that represents it with the leadership and the support. I talked earlier, right, on like how important this is to our culture, but like this project's so meaningful to me that when I had began this, I didn't just touch base with my parents and family, which they're meaningful and they're so supportive, and I'm so grateful for that. But it was important for me to also reach out to like the different elders and different leaders that I know within my community to just show them the project and show them the game. And I'm like, hey, you guys, like this game is something that I'm very, very passionate about. Do you think that this affects the integrity of Manomen or is could be sacrilegious to the sacred? You guys have been so helpful with that and making sure that we're working with the appropriate people and being open to that. And the elders that I talked to about all of this stuff were like, no, this is great. Like this is what we need. We need people to help bridge this opportunity to learn because our young people need to have an opportunity to learn, and sometimes how we do that now is looks very different than the way that we might have used to need to do it. And yeah, we're working with artists, right? Like we reached out to different artists and stuff. And I hope that answers your question. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts and processes on this.
I
Yeah.
definitely think there's a big opportunity there for the learning. Like that was
Mhm.
after our first time playing, um, like I felt like I understood the general process. Like obviously I didn't go out and do it or anything, but like because I
Yeah.
did it in the game, it sticks with you longer than had I just, read something about it or whatever. Like it's like, oh no, you need to do these steps in this order, and here's why. Like and it makes sense. You're gonna, you gotta gather it first with the docking sticks, then you gotta dry it out,
Yeah.
and then parch it, and you're going through all those steps. You're gonna dance on it to break the husks up, and so like we actually went and did more reading after playing about the whole process and watched videos and found other things. So if we can get, if when the general public plays the game and it gets them into looking more into it themselves, that'd be great. It's like
Yeah.
I think learning through games is one of the best ways to learn about something because it's like you feel more involved or attached to it rather than just I'm just reading something on a page sort of thing. It's like it's more
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah.
Yep. And we did have someone ask a question. I think they were asking, like, kind of how did you learn about gaming? Like, as you were either growing up or getting into gaming, like, where did you kind of get introduced to gaming in general?
So what when the way that I really got introduced to gaming was, I mean, I was introduced to like spoons and Monopoly and all life and everything else like that by my parents, but um was through Emily, my partner. She and her family were such big board game people when I first started, and we played so much Scrabble. so many introductions to like Catan and the different specialties that we were coming up with, all that stuff. And so when I got into gaming in that way, we went into a very large deep dive because she also worked in the industry for a little while, and learned about it, and kind of helped me learn a little bit about it, but not really, because there's a lot of lines that you can't cross with that. But it started out with that process, of her family really introducing me to what games can be, and more and more involvement through those gateway games.
Yeah, very cool. Nice. Well, is there anything else you want to add? I think we've kind of gone through the questions that we were going to ask. We can end with kind of ways that people can get involved or learn more. But before we go into that, if any of you have anything else you want to add or say about
Or if
Manomen,
anybody watching has a
yeah,
question, go ahead and
any
add it to
question.
the chat.
And if you're watching this later, we'll be sure to check questions beyond the live stream so you can ask and we'll comment back.
And I don't mind following up with people if people reach out as well, because I think that this has an opportunity of learning and touching base on all those things.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think
I
in the
think,
comments, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I think in the comments now or after it goes, after it posts, after the live, there should be a link to like our Facebook group where you can follow along with the game. And then we have a Discord server where you can, again, follow along with the game or even jump into some play test if you want to play it, to check it out and try it and kind of help us develop it over the coming months. But I'll let you say what you're going to say. Then I'll come back to maybe talking about like our timeline. Um,
Yeah. I just want to say that, like, I'm grateful for the opportunity to help bring a voice to the community as much as I can, right? And I, by no means is my voice large, but I think that through any Native American who wants to be out there, that's going to be including and growing and trying to help the preservation of our culture, like, please just support any community you guys can, because a lot of this stuff, through both governmental means and through our lack of available resources right now, it's important for us to help create that learning space for these cultures that are struggling and sometimes are very, very underrepresented. So any support you guys can give and any opportunity you guys can give to reach out to any of the organizations around the Twin Cities, any organization around the United States that helps Native American people and tribes and stuff like that, that would be meaningful to me and help. Yeah, and I'd just be grateful for that. And so I'm grateful for you guys giving us the platform that we have right now to introduce this to the world in the way that we're doing with Manomen.
yeah, well, we're
That's
honored to get to do it and have loved working on it so far. And excited to see where it goes. Our plan at the moment is to continue the rest of this year developing it. So that's going to be play testing it online with Tabletop Simulator, taking it to conventions, demoing it, showing it to people, just getting as much feedback as we can to, craft it into the best version of itself that it can be. And then probably early next year, start working on more of the graphic design and art. And then hopefully, Q3, Q4, mid to late next year, bring it to crowdfunding where people can then jump in on it. But yeah, so unless the other guys have anything else, we can wrap it up there. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for chatting with us, Miss Key, and all the insightful information about Manomen and the culture. And it was great to chat with you.
Miigwech, you guys.
Yeah, thanks. See y'all later.
Thanks.
yeah.